Thing that you would like to address to the Planning Commission, come forward, state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, we'll move on. That's about it for me, so I will be turning it over to the gentleman in charge, Dan.
Gentlemen, yeah, thank you, Tyler. Thanks everybody for coming. This is a little bit of an unusual meeting time for our Planning Commission. We're trying to kind of be closer to the end of the workday for most folks, or maybe the end of the school day. So we got a little bit of an earlier start time. So we might see some planning commissioners trickle in here, but we can go ahead and get started, even though we have kind of a light showing up top here, because what we're going to be talking about is meant to be more of an informal discussion involving different groups of people. I see a city commissioner here. We have some folks from the youth commission, the school districts, the Kent County Health Department, a few folks from the Legion Hall, so a good mix of people here to have a good conversation about South Walker, which is the planning area we'll be talking about during the first half of the meeting tonight. The second half of the meeting, maybe sometime around 6:15 or so, we'll transition into a part of Walker we call the Gateways area, which is kind of where we're sitting right now, everything surrounding Remembrance Road from Leonard up to 3 Mile. But the first part here is going to be about South Walker. So what I'd like to do is just go through a few slides, give a little bit of background to everybody here, and that will kind of open us up to further conversation. And I'd like to have more of a informal discussion where we can sit around the big map Frank prepared on the table here and talk about some of the different aspects of this part of Walker as a group, kind of a more close and personal setting. So before we do that, let me just first of all ask, can everybody see the screens here? The orientation is a little bit unusual, so let me make sure I have at least one screen showing out towards the crowd here. This is set up more for a around the table discussion, which is good because we will get there eventually, but let me get at least that screen out. Can everybody see that okay? All right. So here's the part of Walker that we're working within. When we're talking about South Walker, we're talking about, broadly speaking, everything south of O'Brien Street. So this is about 6.5 square miles of land. This area is a part of town that we, as a planning commission, focused on about 12 years ago with the first round of sub-area planning. And let me back up. When we're talking about sub-areas, what we're really talking about is neighborhood level planning within the city of Walker. As you all might know, Walker is about 26 square miles in area, so it's a lot of land area to cover. That means there's a lot of different types of neighborhoods, different types of land fabrics that we focus in on, and they all have different needs with regard to what utility connections are available, what community amenities are nearby, how traffic moves into and out of these neighborhoods. So we focus on them differently, and that's why we take kind of a finer tooth comb and do this sub-area level of planning. So again, getting back to this specific sub-area, South Walker or Subplan 2, we're looking at the big picture here, and then we drill down into an area that we focused on a little bit more heavily when we first reviewed this part of town in 2007. This was the area south of Burton Street, specifically right near the river. We have a lot of focus on the properties that are kind of aligning the river there, something called the Fensky site, immediately adjacent to the Grand River to the west slash south of M11. That's an area that's had a lot of different land use history over the years, some industrial use in the past, and we're looking at ways that could be redeveloped in the future. So we want to drill down on that and see how it will plug in with the surrounding land uses as this area grows. One of the things we need to know about this part of Walker is that there are no public sanitary sewer utilities in the focus area that we're talking about. So that really impacts how the land can be used, how dense the land can be built out. You are going to have septic fields for residential sewage disposal, as everybody knows who lives in that part of town. And the land use pattern is kind of boxed into a certain low level of density based on there not being public sewer and also limited public water. So these blue lines here are the existing water mains. You can see there's a little bit more water in this part of town. I took the liberty to take some planning documents from the city engineer here regarding the water system, planned growth in the water system over the years. Again, this is kind of the previous layout of phased growth of water main along Wilson. Here's where we are right now, so that kind of the left side of the screen is the north-south line on there is Wilson, and you have water continuing along Hall and to the north there. Excuse me, Burton to the north. So I don't want to get too much into detail on things like land cover, topography, wetlands, some of the really detail-oriented site plan review items that we get into when we review plans every other Wednesday night with this board. What I really want to do is look at the overall picture of this part of Walker before we get into a detailed level of review, talk about what we know about this area, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, currently, and then in the future, what are some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that we see. So just to kind of frame up this discussion, for those of you really familiar with South Walker, you know better than I do, but here's just some examples to get the conversation started. So when we talk about strengths, we can talk about things like the location of this area in relation to some of the regional amenities. We have downtown Grand Rapids nearby, we have Standale, we have Granville, some major recreational resources and natural resources. We have the Grand River right there, Millennium Park, a very large regional park that serves the entire area. But then we also have weaknesses. So like I just said, there's gaps in public utilities that are available. In some cases, there's been mine activity over the years. Historically, there have been gypsum mines, which impact the subsurface soils of these sites, and the earth has been moved around quite a bit on some of these properties. So you have soils that aren't necessarily conducive to building or development. You have some environmental history on some of these sites that can complicate future development. So these are some of the weaknesses we see looking forward to the future, and how you can be limited in how this area grows out. But opportunities, looking in terms of redeveloping some of these sites, river access, future utility connections, transportation improvements that can connect the grid of growth and make the area function a little bit more fluidly as properties redevelop and grow. Threats or challenges, you might look at how different land uses relate to existing private water wells, and you might look at things like the rural character that I think really defines this area, and that seems to be really valued by the people who live there as it continues to grow, and as we continue to push for utilities. On the one hand, we're looking for safe drinking water and reliable drinking water through public water system. At the same time, if that encourages growth, how does that impact the character of the area? So that's just some food for thought. There's probably a million other things you can say in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges. But I just want to let you folks initiate that conversation tonight, so we can come back with some more in-depth research and discussion. This is just one example of one of the strengths you might think about, the location and proximity to regional neighborhoods or areas like Standale and downtown Grand Rapids. When you're thinking through this exercise, you can think in terms of what in planning we kind of talk about as this transect. You move from kind of the countryside, the open spaces, into more agricultural land, into neighborhoods that become more and more dense, and then into increasingly intense land use activity. Definitely doesn't always look like this. It's not a clean transitional line from one to the other, but this is kind of a pattern that you can see in different areas, especially where growth is occurring. And so as you have more intensity and more land use density, more houses closer together, more businesses, you have to think about things like suitable soils for building, public utility connections, safe drinking water, for example, and interconnecting that public road network so that you have different ways to move traffic into and out of different sites. And of course, your ability to preserve large-scale land is a little bit limited the more you grow out. So another relationship you might consider is that contamination, whether it's runoff from agricultural uses or past industrial uses on a site, brownfields, the need for public utilities is more and more important generally on sites where you have people drinking the water. So I want to open this up to what we call the SWOT discussion: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or challenges. I guess what I would like to do is invite everybody to get closer to the big map we have out on the table and focus on the south part of Walker. We can bat around questions, observations, and just write on the board some of the things we see as current assets, current weaknesses, future opportunities, future challenges. So I'd like to open that up, and we can do that for maybe 20, 25 minutes until we move on to the central part of Walker for the second half of the discussion. Okay? Feel free to come on up. To be more move around.
I need to stop.
Oh, if I thought you weren't, I'd be right up on top of you.
space in relation to urban growth around it, and Standale, Jenison, Granville, Wyoming, Grand Rapids. So I think Steve's point kind of speaks to that. We want to make sure our community is connected to the other ones to the west.
You know, when Millennium Park started, that was one of the big concerns there. And they came in, I don't know if Frank was here then or not, but they came in with a report that had something like 14 or 18 incredibly large challenges to building the Millennium Park area, almost all transportation related. And nothing's really been solved. But the size hasn't gotten to the point they thought it would get here.
Well, what were we talking about with, I think it might be an opportunity, but the amphitheater idea. And for us having the lack of, they were talking about lack of transportation access. And then also, what was the other, what we were talking about, parking or?
Could be parking, could be sanitary sewer. But the access is really, it's not even just a one-directional access. For something that big, you really should have it from all directions.
Right, you should be able to get in and
So
out.
it's 2 or 3 multiple points of clean entry and exit.
Yeah.
Does Millennium Park have city water?
Yes,
And it comes from Granville?
Grand Rapids.
Or it comes from Grand Rapids? I understand that the water comes halfway under the river here or something. Granville, is that true or not? But their water, so there is water line coming from Grand Rapids down to here or something.
You know where the big water tanks on Burton are? Right here. There's our water line comes down and stops here. And eventually it may come down to this fenced landfill. But for now, this is the dock to the south terminus.
But it comes into the park.
I'm not sure about Johnson Park, but in the Millennium Park it is.
So that comes from Grand Rapids. Okay.
Yes.
Do we have any sanitary sewer really down in this area?
0 from here south. And you've got 2 schools and a couple of denser neighborhoods.
Well, you got a lot of open territory, but more.
What is going along with his, okay, so we've got water right here. We're with the Legion, and the water stops right here. There's big potential for development here and down here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how far out is water and sewer moving it?
We actually had it designed at one point, laid out, fully designed from here down to Fensky, and they were going to pay for that as part of a special assessment district that they developed. But they would get close to that development, and then they would step back and leave, and they'd come back 2 or 3 years later and say, "How about we try that again?" And it just never got.
That was in the 70s and 80s, right?
That was in the early 2000s.
Early 2000s?
When that happens, then you can start to take a look at the Shoemaker sand pit as well,
Mm-hmm.
and say that water should probably come through there. Maybe if that was developed with some kind of more clustered neighborhood, it would make sense financially, and then the water main could even be looped down there.
Now, is it true that they have to put a whole pumping station down there to get it back up the hill, so to speak, to this point? Because that's quite a bit lower
Well,
elevation.
that's a whole separate side. The water main side doesn't need a pump station because
Okay.
it's got pressure that's built.
Okay,
It's just
okay.
through gravity. Sanitary sewer would have to come this way, and what we did is we worked out a deal, again, about 10 years ago, to have a small area of Walker that went to the Granville system and instead of going to the Grand Rapids system.
Okay.
But we never orchestrated or executed that deal because the Fensky plant fell apart. But if this gets developed in some fashion, whether it's industrial, apartments, housing, who knows what might happen down there, we could build a small pump station to go underneath the river to Granville, which is right there. It's essentially just punch it under the river. But then we would build it big enough so that maybe perhaps some of these more dense areas, schools, and neighborhoods of a riverbed could flow down there as well eventually. I don't think we want to reach much farther than that, but that's really for this group to decide. If they wanted to have more dense development a little further north, they could probably get it to flow a little bit farther.
So both water and sewer, probably not in the next 5 years.
It's so dependent on that Fensky landfill because they've come in several times
Okay.
and said, "Hey, can you turn the switch back on?"
Yeah.
And we're smart enough now to say we're not going to waste a whole lot of city energy if you're not for real.
Right.
So we need somebody to come in and say they're for real. But if they did, we could put it together in a year or 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Who lives in the area south of the bar here, south of O'Brien Street?
We got one.
Ranger Jason. Okay. Jason, what are your insights from living in that area? What are some of the strengths?
Most of the
anybody in a direction, unless we're talking about dense development in rotten areas, and then we have to push for the public health and safety side.
Yeah, there is a big push right now, but you have to look at development stuff.
I've seen them doing the thing where like you look at some trying to spell it.
Property that goes up to the books and goes in the river.
Would a challenge, would it be fair to call the development as a South Walker challenge because it kind of limits how we can improve
Everything.
You name it, or campground.
public perspective.
Campground, sports complex,
Pretty cool.
concrete batch plants, industrial park.
In terms of like putting more infrastructure in there.
Does that be slow?
That's a good question.
They've
They've always had a sign out there, and I know that at one point they claimed to have sold it to somebody else, and then, I don't know if that dissolved, and then HIVMA came back in again. So it's HIVMA, it's Svensky, it's somebody else, we don't know.
Well, as far as like, so in my perfect world, different from Jason's, but I would love to see like that kind of water and sewer infrastructure going there, just because, you know, for someone like myself, we have concerns about with septic systems and things like that. The longevity of using those as a permanent fixture for the treatment there. And we believe in public water, and there's lots of talk about water quality issues these days. That's something we always are try to be sensitive to. But I really think the way we develop down there makes it really challenging to put that kind of infrastructure down there as far as the cost offsetting with the type of residency base you've got down there. You don't have like the business community down there to support something like that.
Take some big drivers.
Right.
It's like that.
Right. We kind of got our single family houses spread out down there, and it'll be tough to, I mean, we're not going to change the fabric of how that's developed. I don't think we can plan that. I don't think we want that. But
A lot of existing wells and a lot of existing septic.
Yep.
But again, the Wilson corridor could be isolated for the water main, and then to some extent for the sewer to keep that separated. But in order to make that work at the Fensky site, you couldn't just build a campground. That wouldn't have enough money generated to pay for all that extra water.
Right.
It'd be tough.
Right. The stuff like right off of Wilson probably could be considered separately from like the stuff to the east of that. Right. And what I'm thinking.
But down by the VFW, couldn't you, if there's that line and everything in there, if they decide to put housing in there, couldn't we run a loop in there
Yep.
and connect that so they could build, develop that
Yeah, that would be ideal.
cluster?
And hopefully it would be done in concert with, I think the Wellers own a whole bunch of property back there too. So you really, when we did this last South Walker loop, we met with every large property owner in South Walker to see what they're thinking, what are their plans, are they going to split it up, are they going to settle off as one, do they want to develop it? And I think we probably have to take on that exercise again to talk to all the big property owners to see who was interested and who wasn't.
People, my well was back on Kindle Channel, that property comes up there, property over there, back of the region. And I know people that live on Kindle, their water is terrible back there. It's like 100 degrees. It's like our water at the focus, it's terrible. And back in there, it's pretty bad too. At least as far as hardness.
Right. Jason, do you want to jump in on some of that stuff?
Yeah, I'm with the health department, so I'm the project specialist. I review subdivisions and new development, commercial sites. And over the years, I can say the same thing. The Fensky property has been looked at a number of times. As far as heavy industrial users to apartment buildings. And it's always been between access to Wilson Avenue, the water quality, and the soils that are up there. It's been a non-starter. They have put some test wells in to see what's the water quality like out there, and again, how much water is there. That area along the river, you get some shallow bedrock deposits, typically something that could be a sand pit. So you got sand down to bedrock. Or you got other areas where you got 200 or 300 feet of clay before you hit bedrock. And if you're fortunate to have a sandy site where you can drill a well, you might be able to complete a well from 30 feet to 60 feet down. You'll probably be happy with the way your water tastes. If you actually took a test of it for pesticides, fertilizer contamination, you might be a little surprised. Most people don't do a test for those things because they don't, I don't know if you don't want to know, or just because you're happy with the way it is.
What do you have
no
to
reason to test. And then you got some bedrock wells out there that it's more described as brine than groundwater. As far as EPA and EQ are concerned, some of the wells out there wouldn't even be classified as groundwater, it's classified as brine. And that's why we have a lot of oil wells out there. Oil wells, you can't drill into a potable water source to complete a oil well, but you can drill through brine formations. And when they did a lot of that exploration in the 30s and 40s, they sunk some wells and said, well, this isn't even a usable water source, this is brine. And you drill a bunch of wells out there. And now we have houses and we're drinking the brine. That can be treated. It takes a lot of reverse osmosis type systems, and you can't really have galvanized plumbing in the house or copper. It's got PVC. Your gas fittings are going to corrode. Your water heaters are going to corrode. And I'm talking doom and gloom. Not everybody's in this situation, but you mean Jason also? Okay, so you must have a better well than some people.
It's deep.
Yeah, and you can go like one house to the other, same well depth. Your neighbor might have completely unusable water, and then you have water. I can put a water softener in here and an iron filter and drink this. It kind of depends on the rock deposit that you drill into. You might drill another well 30, 40 feet away and have fine water. So it's a roll of the dice anytime the well show out there. And you get a lot of people that probably would disagree with you when they want that same water after they put their 12 hot water heater in since the house is built. And that water quality also wreaks havoc on septic systems. It's corrosive, not only to your household plumbing, but it can be corrosive to your septic system. You have concrete decay in your septic tanks, which the hall is figuring out right now. It can upset bacteria activity in your septic tank and cause premature septic failure. There's conditions with having corrosive groundwater. And when you're water softening it, you're adding a lot of salt to salty water, so you just make everything just worse. The area around Riverbend is an area with some good quality taste, I should say good tasting water. Those areas, Riverbend and Wilson, the Penske plat there. A lot of those people are happy with their wells, but we had a developer come in and wanted to develop they had about 15 acres there. And they did some water testing out there and had some surprising results with nitrates, and that comes from septic systems and fertilizers. Found out that the levels out there are high and wouldn't be suitable for new development. There's city water there that new development could go in and utilize city water. However, planning group and the health department didn't feel comfortable allowing more homes to occupy that site and just exacerbate the nitrate level that's already in the area, allowing an expansion of more homes being connected to city water.
So really, you're on your southern part along the river, you're thinking more of commercial there rather than residential.
That's not up to the health department. We just review the plans that come in. It's local planning that decides that. As far as any development utilizing septic systems for industrial use, that's not a good idea at all.
It really is close access to coming underneath the river, and that's what I heard earlier. It's already here, so if they did come off of here, they could service that rather fast.
Well, with the sewer, but not with water.
Yeah.
probably going to be focusing in on areas where development and growth want to occur, right? So there's certain areas where you have, like that one, sort of an incomplete street network. You see kind of a phase one of an old plat that probably is meant to go somewhere and connect back out to Riverbend at some point. So we have to think about what that growth pattern might look like. What else do we have in South Walker? A lot of big mine sites. So those sites are not going to be mined forever. They're 4 major sand mines. 1 or 2 of those may be undercut by some gypsum, so they probably won't redevelop. But 2 of them are pretty viable for potential future development. So we'll probably look at whether there is a magic mix of utilities or lack of utilities that can serve those sites as they turn over from mines and grow out.
You had mentioned when you're coming down Wilson, it's right up to Burton right there. And if they do that sand pit from Marshall or wherever right here, that sand pit, they could maybe pull it off Burton Street.
Yeah, let's go to image number 3. So I think what you're referring to here is the Shoemaker Pit right by your building. And we're talking about potential redevelopment here. So I know one of the aspects of future growth we want to think about is connectivity of the road network. So and with the road network, maybe the utility network. So maybe there's another spine of growth along some kind of a road pattern that crosses north-south through the mine site and then connects up to Burton all the way down to the very southern tip here. And that's something that was brought up in the previous planning process back in '07. So it's certainly something worth thinking about. How do you latch onto another road pattern, kind of orient the traffic onto that road and diffuse the growth out there?
Has there been communication with the sand pit on developing this here?
They have an end-of-use plan. So when sand mine operators come in and we know their soil may be suitable for building in the future, we ask them to give us their best shot at what that might look like.
Things keep changing down the way.
Basic residential plat that's been shown.
Oh, yeah, they're
Nothing really very, not a
big time.
But it's good.
That's pretty amazing. They've taken a lot of sand out of there.
God, that's great.
That comes down.
For somebody.
If they did bring water and sewer back down because you have it on here, if it did come back down in here, if they pulled it off first, what would be our possibility of connecting the water?
It'd be good. Good. The further that goes, though,
You need a loop system.
you need a loop. The further it goes, Grand Rapids and the state are going to look at it and say, you've got to loop it back to Wilson so that if there's ever a break or anything has to be shut down, the water's moving both ways.
But didn't you say earlier that, or we just talking water, not sewer?
Water, just water right now.
Okay. Because the sewer would have to approach from the lower
Correct.
level to get to us.
That's correct. And logically, it could go right through the center of the Shoemaker Pit, and then it could go another mile north. There's not a lot of people between that mile that would want it, but once you get up to Riverbend, there's a lot of people that could take advantage of it. And Jason mentioned there was a residential development there. One of the primary reasons it didn't get approved was because there's so many drain fields so close together already that the nitrates are way too high. And so if you added another 25 or 30 of those in close quarters, then every existing well would get a little bit worse. So it's important to try to at least have some plan for them in the future.
Another angle I can throw in, I'm Roger Burke, I'm the superintendent of Granville. You know, if you have a growth happening, up by Meyer, a variety of places, there's a lot of opportunities. So whatever happens here, I mean, if there's growth, there's housing, we have some land, and I'm not sure we would use the land we have. I'm not sure if we would schools, north of the river. So, I think that's also something to consider in this whole picture.
Do you guys still own the piece at River Bend, the old school there?
We do, that's really, it's too small land-wise to really do a lot with. And to do anything in the current building, you'd have to level it because it would never meet the codes of the day. So, I'm not sure we would do anything there. We own land by 8th and Luce. We own Wilson and Paul, I believe. And we've looked at some other areas, knowing we're in the process right now of establishing another, 3, 5, 10-year plan. And within that plan, looking at the growth that's happening and the potential growth. I talked to former Mayor Heisinger yesterday at the Capitol. Same things. He thought the same thing, that over time, you have a lot of potential there. And if that happens, obviously, we can't just, all of a sudden this happens and it's like, oh, we need a building like tomorrow. We have to plan way ahead too. So we've been looking at that because we know eventually if the growth happens, there's going to have to be, probably schools. When I say that, I mean you might have a elementary middle school combo that turns into a high school eventually. I don't know. It just depends on what really happens north of the river. But that'll obviously all play within what happens here.
Seems like it'd be a good idea to get kind of a small group together of us, or as part of this process, to look at some of those hot spots for you and make sure that we're working towards that, so we don't box you out.
Right.
And the school's not just a school, it's a community gathering place, it's where you want to have safe pedestrian routes nearby, and it sounds like a great opportunity. We've got a lot of good stuff on the board here. Everybody ready for a quick summary, and then I'll say maybe another comment from Pat, and then I'll have an idea. So, yeah.
I'm looking at the map, we have one road that kind of runs along here,
Yeah.
connects Grand Rapids to the south side of the city. Plans in the future to make that a better road that people would want to drive down rather than, because it connects the two parks, it connects Grand Rapids, it kind of connects into.
Ask Jason if he'd like a better road there.
The Butterworth, it's funny, my kids will make comments that they say City of Walker Road is really nice, and then you go to Grand Rapids and it sucks. Because that's all along the way of done. So, we do a nice job of keeping that road good.
Well, I know, but I'm just thinking like making improvements on it, putting a lane in, or turn lane in some places.
We've talked about it.
Curbs in there.
We've talked about it as part of Millennium Park expansion, but it would really have to be, either have to be so much money coming in.
Well, I understand, I'm just saying in the future, I
The only complaint I have really hear on that is it would be nice if there was some sort of paved shoulder, because there's so many people that bike down that area.
It kind of washes out a lot of places, so it's make it a nicer route from John Ball all the way down to here. Then I'm looking at Johnson Park, we got Millennium Park. How's Johnson Park doing these days? It's Millennium's really growing, but Johnson really.
It's pretty wet today.
It's kayaks.
Different being used as much as it used to be before Millennium. Is it
Pretty
a park
active
that's kind of
still.
dying, or is it a park that's still alive? I don't go there anymore because I go to Millennium. I used to go to Johnson all the time for a lot of different company picnics and everything else, and they've all moved to different places.
Maybe we could pull those folks into the next meeting to get some more input from them.
Just taking a look at that piece of property down there. There's a castle, here we put a castle.
Yeah, right.
Mickey Mouse.
We're gonna make this a defense.
I might summarize what we have here, just to keep things moving along. I'm going to summarize what we have on the board, but I'm going to offer that anybody who wants to should feel free to talk to me after the meeting, and I can write down some other ideas. Or feel free to look up our info on the website or stop into the community development office here. But we have some good comments here, some of them going back and forth with transportation, the overall transportation pattern, I think is what's being talked about there. And then more specifically, lack of access to transit. We have obviously some big recreational amenities here, specific parks, future growth, but it is a hole without transit there, and regional transit network. So that's something else to think about. No water and sewer in a lot of areas, no sewer in basically the entire area. It's for all development, so that development pattern we want to try to rein in and plan well. Lack of infrastructure, an incomplete street network, and flooding. So a variety of social, economic, environmental.
We should really add traffic safety to that Wilson corridor too, because over the years, I mean, that is a really, really big deal. There's been a lot of fatalities. You've got trucks screaming down that road, especially in the winter, down serious grading in the ice. And that's been one of the big hurdles for Shoemaker and Fenske is how do people get in and out safely.
Right.
So, and I know Frank had some other ideas about how we could
I was
do
going
some
to
long
ask
term.
you, is there a plan in the fairly near future to widen that, to get the traffic from Granville to Walker, like 4 lanes of road, or from Walker to Granville?
No, they, state keeps saying they want to do that, but they're not doing very many expansion projects. They're doing a lot of maintenance projects.
Mm-hmm.
And
Resurfacing.
quite honestly, I think they look at, this road used to be the same as the East Belt line, and they took the East Belt line and made it into a divided highway, and now it's just a monstrosity, where it's 3 lanes in some sections, it's still not big enough. And I think they prefer to not do that over here, and I think we have a little better planning on this side. But ultimately, it's got to be a 3 or 5 lane road.
You're absolutely right. Their focus is on pavement, ride quality now.
Yes.
And they will mill and fill roads that, in my humble opinion, don't need it. And I've worked for the road commission for 45 plus years, and the road funding has been starved since 1994. So, don't throw me out of the room, but the governor's right. I mean, we need 45 cents a gallon to get to the point where Wilson can be widened and those type of capacity improvements. Michigan's not doing any capacity improvements.
No.
I just came from 2 weeks in Florida, and it's like, they're widening everywhere. So, anyways.
Everywhere but here.
We'll try to hold that. That's
The safety thing's
Everywhere but here.
We'll pulling MDOT in the loop too. We have MDOT and just like the parks, we try to bring more agencies on board who have some purview over what's happening here.
Has there been any discussion with the township? If sewer and water was available on our side, is there any indication that concentrated growth development would be on the other side of the?
We talked to them about acreage and density, and they had some pretty small numbers, but they had enough wisdom to say if you're going to build it, we should at least plan for the next 20, 40 years. So, yeah, if we were to put a pump station down at the very bottom, what's the maximum area that would contribute to it, and let's make sure that we at least design it so that it can facilitate that maximum area.
And that's a really good point. Space doesn't stop at our county line here. We want to bring the Talmadge folks in and do edge matching across the line. Make sure our growth pattern matches theirs.
And we share a utility district, so we're partners.
So future opportunities, we have a lot of, I'd like to see more opportunities and threats or challenges on the board, because that means we're being really creative and thinking about how this stuff is going to come together in the future. So opportunities, we have an alternative route to M11, connectivity to the areas in the southwest, development at the southern tip site or the Fenske site, the water connection, the Wilson corridor, along the Wilson corridor, potentially new amphitheater, well-planned street networks, potential for the Granville School on the north side of the river, improvement to Butterworth, water connectivity with Talmadge and edge matching, just talked about. And then threats or challenges, potential strain on utilities, septic systems and water quality, spotty water quality for different wells, things like brine, fertilizers, with some more data. So we're working with the health department, we're working with MDOT, we're reaching out to these different groups to get things like the data on points of where water wells are, where oil wells are, what the groundwater table looks like, where different traffic data applies to this road network, things like crash data and traffic counts, so that we can start to layer this stuff on maps that we can start to dig into a little bit deeper as we get further into the planning process. This is a great start. It gives us some good direction to move forward with, so I'll take that picture. Feel free to reach out to me after the meeting and keep the conversation going. So thanks, everybody. I guess we can, if you want to stay down here, go up to the top, I'll take a picture.
We're shifting to a different part of town, so I won't be heard if you're not interested in another part of town. So I know it's, you guys have got dinner together and all that. Let's do this. Let's flip this over.
Thanks, Jason.
If you would erase once again, well, Dan hasn't taken photos.
Yeah, let me take a picture.
Take a couple of photos and then we'll flip it, and then you can erase while I talk on the back side of the board. And we'll transition right in.
All right.
You guys can stay up here. Same thing. Same thing. I guarantee we'll be out of here by 7 o'clock. All right? We're gonna column this thing. Oop. Hey, Andrea, let Roxanne get a photo. Let Roxanne get a photo before we flip it.
Sorry, I didn't have my phone right there.
You're all right.
Thanks for being so.
I do feel like that. I know, right? Always fun. Okay.
All right, I think
Okay, we're just gonna raise. Okay. How was your week?
Good.
Good.
Busy.
Yes.
Readily do what I was gonna do on Saturday. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Give out slides.
Quickly. Keep this one moving. And out by 7.
Oh, are you doing the same thing?
If we're not out by 7, Frank's buying dinner.
That's true. That's a good incentive. I'm keeping one eye on that crowd. But you guys can read the top piece of the history.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Completely off.
They're biting into my time. Biting into my time.
Way back when I was just a kid. 22, 21.
Where's Harry? Harry, make big time. He needs silence, right? I know.
It's a nice building.
It changes it.
All right, let's spin that back right over.
Oh, you need to see the other
That's, we're gonna talk to that, and that's gonna paint the picture for what this one's gonna
I'm getting it.
be. And what Dan did. Okay, we got 25 minutes. Mr. Chair, can I take you in the next truck here? All right. Working area 2. The reason we brought this big map out is Scott and Travis printed this years ago. I think it was 2016 for floodplain mapping. So what you see, that's when they were redoing some of the FEMA maps. But I think Dan's right. If you look at this, Walker's in an interesting spot. You don't need to be a planner to look and say, this is a fairly big city area, high density and built, redeveloping as it goes, which is good. Alpine Township to the north is farm, except for the Alpine Avenue corridor, and has long-term, essentially urban growth boundary restrictions on development outside of a small sanitary sewer and water district. So you've got kind of a block to the north for population growth. You're built out to the south and the east, and then Talmadge Township, which is in the Grand Rapids water and sewer system, has growth planned to about 8th Avenue, but more at a township level. So you're kind of locked on the west, except for out to 8th Avenue. And Walker is right in between these. So this community is going to have an interesting next 20 to 30 years, because you have your urban core and your rural, and then Walker's right in the middle. So what we're doing, and the reason we're looking out to 2040 is, for those of you who are in your teens here, if the economy stays fairly strong and people stay smart around here with the way that things are going, like we're doing now, the way governments work together and being fiscally responsible and all that, and just generally economic health, Walker is going to have to put some people in to the city. So that's why we're doing this process. Because the land use and quality of life go together, and this community actually has a really long history of doing land use planning. You can go all the way back to, I think our earliest one we have is the 58 plan, which was a Walker Township plan, and then there was another plan in the 60s. And either the 58 or the 60 plan benchmarks Walker to Warren and Flint. So that sounds, and the population build-up was going to be 90,000 people. We currently have about 25,000. We're probably 50% grown out. So you can see how things change over time. We're certainly not going to benchmark to Warren or Flint now because that whole model has changed. You know, do you want 90,000 people? Where are we going to put an extra, you know, all those extra people in this little area? So you're constantly reinventing your vision of the future. But the way we're benchmarking now, you keep that in the back of your mind. You know, the history is a great teacher. Things have changed pretty dramatically over the one person's lifetime. 1998, the city did our last master plan, which is a book. It's more of a reference book. You folks who are officials use that all the time, whether you know it or not. The staff is always plugging stuff from this 98 plan in there. It was done by a guy named Langworthy, who was kind of one of the fathers of planning around here. It's very simple, but it's very effective, and there's always benchmarks in there. So that kind of sits up here as the guiding document for the city. It was a 20-year plan, so we're coming up on the end of that 20 years. What Dan and I and Scott have been doing since 2005 is going a little bit deeper into that plan and developing these things called subplans, which are more neighborhood-based. So you just saw we're looking at a big chunk of the city, almost 25% of the city, as subplan 2. But those of you who've been around for a while know that we've been hitting all these neighborhood spots all over the city, and we just finished 1A and 5. And now we're looking at 2 down here and then 6 up here, and we'll talk about that in a second. So by the time we get all those done, you'll have about 80–85% of the land use, the land cover of the city done at a neighborhood level. Okay? So that's going a little bit deeper, but we're still referencing back. We've also identified some gaps on Alpine Avenue. And we don't need to get into that tonight, but if you look at the slide, we just fired our master plan consultants, and we're bringing another one on board. And one of the things we've identified in the scope is those of you who are youngsters, and we're going to try and get people's ideas, because Alpine Avenue in 2040 is going to be a lot different than it is now. So your next 20 years of planning, we're going to get into another kind of, how is that going to look? Let's put all these variables together. It's part fact, and then it's part opinion. Okay, because we can say we would like things to be a certain way, but planning really should have a bend and an underlying foundation in reality. And then you kind of go along over the 20 years and make it happen. Okay? So that's how these pieces are fitting together. And then, just to let you guys know before we get into this, I just sent the contract out from McKenna. The City Commission gave the blessing on Monday, so Planning Commission members, this is pretty easy. We've been saying this for 2 years now. Here's all we want out of the master plan. All we want to do is go back and benchmark to this thing. You know, do people still agree with the 98 plan? All of this stuff in here. So this is more factual, but the things like vision and goals and objectives and quality of life and all that. We just want to benchmark to that. It's pretty simple. Everybody wants to make it complex, but I think McKenna gets it. And their project manager's a local guy too, so that's going to help out a lot. And so we want to be higher level, but consistent with the sub-plans. I think they get that too. We couldn't get that point across previously. And then it needs to be consistent with the state law and then something called RRC. Because eventually a group called the MEDC, where we get a lot of our grant money, is going to make sure that if your master plan and all your processes are RRC compliant, you're not going to be eligible for grants. It's like a lot of the things you guys heard on Monday night for transportation grants. If we don't have all of these boxes checked, then you can't apply for grants. So that's how these, I just wanted you guys to get this picture of the 98 plan, this thing we're calling Walker 2040, is kind of up here, general, and then our subplans are a little bit lower, neighborhood level. So, to take a look at Subplan 6, we actually did a lot of this in 2011 and 2012, for those of you who were around. And we call it gateways. So we're going to revisit this process. And we're going to do it the same way we've been doing the subplans to date, right? We wanted to get you guys an opportunity to get some feedback in here now, so that Dan and Scott and I can take this and start plugging it into the subplan review process, okay? So that's why we're doing this swap. We want to get back from the officials. Here's some things that you should think about before we take this into the public process, okay? Because you folks really are the decision makers long term, okay? And this part of town is a little bit more narrowly focused. Subplan 2, not only is it spatially a big part of the city, it involves down to DEQ, surface division, land gas. There's 200 oil wells in South Walker, you know? Nobody knows that, but there's 200 oil wells down there. It's the Muskegon formation, and you know, so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in South Walker, which is good because we'll pull all that together in the master planning process. Subplan 6, which originally was the area shown in kind of yellow here, was the Remembrance Road corridor and the M11 corridor and Leonard. Who was around when we were doing that stuff? We got a couple of. So that will look very familiar because we're going to bring all that back. Most of it was almost ready to be approved, and then we just went into implementation because the DNW site wasn't going to redevelop. That was kind of the whole driver. We put together, and you'll see it again, a mixed-use infill redevelopment, a lot of the kind of stuff that you see going in on the west side now. Take all that stuff down and put in mixed use, build in the senior housing, the medical housing that's down there. So we're going to bring that back because that building's not going to last forever. Certainly not how it's being used. What we wanted to do was expand down 3 Mile Road to the railroad bridge and then down to Richmond because you folks are all dealing with a fairly significant development on Richmond Street. And not only is that development by right, it's including, we need to get a connection to 3 Mile Road. And that brings in all the capital improvements on 3 Mile. Okay? So we wanted to expand the scope of Subplan 6, but it's pretty much a City of Walker thing. With Kenowa, we'll bring Grand Rapids in, but they're already built out. You know, so it's pretty much Walker and Kenowa on this one. And what we'll do is, once we get through this, one of the follow-ups we'll do is identify large vacant spaces within Subplan 6, and that's how we'll get into future land use planning. That's the same thing we'll do in South Walker too. Here's these big pieces. You know, a lot of it is already built out if you look at the map. But what about the big pieces, the remaining things? How are those going to build out? How are we going to make sure that everybody complains about traffic, but then we don't have good connectivity? So, you know, there's these competing interests, and the goal of the master plan is to list all of those competing interests, list all the facts, and then put together as a vision and then goals for the future. Okay? And it all gets played out in rooms like this. So here's what I'd like to do. Knowing that we're specific to this area that's identified as 6 on the map, Leonard Street, 3 Mile, Railroad Bridge on 3 Mile, County Line. I assume, because that's right here, kind of in the middle of Walker, I assume that everybody has some opinions about what's working, what's not working, what are we going to look like in the future, etc. So I'm going to ask Andrea, we're going to go column by column and list them out, and then we can summarize at the end, and we'll have you guys out in about 7. Okay. Any questions before we get going? We're going to follow the same sub-plan process. Dan and I added this extra on the front of these because they're the last 2 we're going to do, and we wanted to give you folks a shot at getting those issues out in front of it, so we just don't start with a blank board when we start to roll into the public process. Okay? Because we want you folks to take ownership over this stuff too. Plans are no good and planning is no good if it's just Dan and I and Scott saying, you know, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. It doesn't work. Our job is to kind of, you know, be a little bit of a rudder, because a lot of times things will get said and it's like, okay, here's some facts, let's look at some facts, and then let's bring it back. And, you know, but our job is not to be the decision makers. You guys are the decision makers. So we want you to be, take ownership in all this stuff from the beginning. And that's what we're going to drive through with this McKenna process too. A little bit more up here, but we wrote into the scope to do a Alpine Avenue, I forgot what we called it. Plan Alpine Avenue 2040. We'll rent a room out on Alpine. There's all that old University of Phoenix site, and we'll roll it out there. Come on out, we'll do a presentation and a workshop, and let's get some ideas up there. There's a beautiful view that we're completely wasting on Alpine Avenue. And in the future, that should be one of the things that we look at. And those boxes, Amazon, you know? And just remember, if you've been around a while, Alpine killed Plainfield, and I got a feeling Amazon's going to kill Alpine to a certain extent. So, but there's some opportunities in that as well, because the location is still good. Just like the location of this area is good. You're right on that urban edge. You've got all this quick access to work and quality of life things, and that's what we're going to get into now. Okay?
You know, one good thing that's never going to be killed along this corridor is government. We have a really big government campus. That stuff stays forever. They're always going to be needed. And the fact that we have so much area and property together, so many uses that are out in one location is very unique to Walker. And that's a really good strength to hang on to.
There we go. So that is a good intro. Knowing what you know about this Subplan 6 area, right now in Walker, and based on the past, what are the strengths of this part of town? What do you think? Land use, transportation, housing, parks.
Great recreational parks right in that city.
And we've got a big park here, and then there are a couple of neighborhood parks, at least one neighborhood park kind of nooked into the subdivisions.
Potential for residential growth.
What kind of residential?
I think what we've been seeing is mostly single family.
Okay. Opportunity, single family residential. What density? Lower density. What do you mean by that?
I feel like walking into Steve's future. Steve,
Yeah.
are you getting married?
Yes, Professor.
We need to speak the language of planning. This group in here, I'm comfortable with you folks to get into it a little bit. So what kind of density? Compared to South Walker, what we were just looking at, Subplan 2.
Compared to South Walker, these are probably more medium-sized, large, but
Compared to Ward 1.
What are the ones?
sorry,
Don't worry about it, we'll get you
we're
there.
clearly talking through it.
Yes.
Ward 1 is a lot denser, more tightly packed, I would say, than what we're kind of looking at now in sub-area 6.
And I want Dan to hear that because McKenna wants to do these neighborhood clusters. And what you just said is something that we talked about in 05, about generally speaking, and that's why we got into neighborhood level planning, Walker is not homogeneous. There are different neighborhoods, there are different types. And if we're being planners, we really need to get into that level of detail. Because those are the detailed decisions that you guys make up here, right? You always hear the higher level comments, but if the devil's in the details on all this.
There's trail connectivity in this area too. Dan, since we have like the youth commission in here, can you quick go over the low density colors, or, you know, I mean, like,
Yeah, this map is not indicative of what you're talking about. So maybe is there a zone?
you
There's a
guys
zoning
remember that
master
when we
plan,
had Dan
so-
present?
Yeah.
We talked about different, some represented residential, some represented low industrial. I'll let you go over it.
Yeah, so when you heard Steve say we have a lot of residential growth in the area, you can see, what's the big color you see in this area? Yellow, right? So yellow, your lighter yellow is going to be low density residential.
Yeah, it's white.
Maybe it's kind of
That's
a banana light yellow color. So yeah, you're going to have medium density residential be a little bit darker, often kind of darker yellow or orange. The commercial is going to be red. Does anybody know what the blue is there? small parcels and streets already lined up in those areas.
And as a refresher for everybody, that's the master plan map, and it's broad brush, you know, looks pretty general just by category. And this is the zoning maps. You see a lot more color, you see a lot more texture, because zoning is the law. So the plan is generally speaking, and then the law gets into, on that particular piece of property, here's what you're allowed to do. Okay? So that's how we keep getting more and more specific. And that's where things get contentious, because that's when we talk about things like density. Density anywhere in the world is generally seen as a bad thing. It's really interesting. And it's relative, but there are parts of Chicago where a 17-story building is no good, but an 18-story is. You know, so you're always dealing with emotions and facts, emotion and facts. So that's the challenge that you guys are. So I'm going to leave this image up here. Let's continue going. The red is the boundary of the subplan. The yellow we'll get to hopefully as we walk through here. Remember we talked about focus elements for the last two subplans we did? Those are just areas that we hone in on and get more detail. So what other strengths in this part of town do we have?
The infrastructure is there for growth generally.
A lot of connectivity,
Connectivity for,
sidewalks, I think we've done very well there. I mean, we have so much more than what we did in the last 15, 20 years.
invested heavily in non-motorized. Right? T-Bone, what do you mean when you say infrastructure?
Well, there's water and sewer in this area that can be expanded. I mean, there may be some structure that has to be added to water and sewer. Like Richmond Farms, we talked about that. We have to figure out what's downline and what's upline from it. See if we can have to enlarge the pipes, you know, that type of thing. But it's already here.
Yeah, and to Tyler's point, it's a very different set of challenges with that infrastructure than we face in the other part of town that we were talking about earlier. So, and I'd much rather have these.
These are easier, but it's harder because that green space surrounded by urban, generally speaking, nobody wants anything on those green spaces, right? So that's the challenge. Same thing in Southwater, you know, but this is a little bit different because as you urbanize, those green spaces become more and more valuable to people who live there. Okay. All right, any other strengths that we want to list for now?
The new schools building here at Leonard and King.
Zinser Acre?
Yeah, that's great.
And it's a little off the beaten path, but central.
Yeah.
Kennewill Hills Public Schools represented tonight, so.
Dr. Hopkins is here, so.
SER.
Yeah.
Actually, the schools have been improved there.
So generally speaking,
It's all the schools, because they're working on it all.
It's just a great Kennewick's investment into the community.
Yeah.
They're tied in tight.
strong Kennewill influence, and I would say based on my time here, Kennewill was a very positive
Absolutely, it is.
item.
Definitely
in
a
law.
partner.
Okay.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Ken Owa.
There, we got it.
I think we've got a nice mix of housing styles here. You know, you've got some apartments here and some over there, right? But then you've also got some condos, you've got a lot of single family, but it's generally pretty different. You've got like senior housing down here.
Okay, to keep you on time, weaknesses of, what don't you like about this area now?
Traffic safety on all that.
Traffic safety?
Yeah.
Alpine.
Alpine Avenue generally, or?
Traffic. I'm saying
We're
traffic.
going that far east.
We're only within the red boundary.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right, how about 3 Mile?
But Dan's is an interesting observation because it kind of points out the fact that we don't have enough north-south roads through here. Everything's bunched up in 1 or 2 spots, and we really need more connectivity.
That's talking about opportunities though, Scott.
Well,
Yeah, so-
we said about Richmond Farms.
Right.
Richmond Farms.
That we have to connect to 3 Mile.
These two should go together, right? And that's where your plan comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we take weaknesses and make them opportunities? That's policy development.
So,
So you can,
The stupid railroad bridge on 3 Mile.
yeah.
yes. that one too.
We are, we're clipping them off, guys.
I remember when I said to Scott, we're taking out the Walker Railroad Bridge, and he said, "You're crazy."
Nice. I added
He
some
says that every day.
There was profanity at it.
blank.
And I said, that bridge is coming out. It's a $5 million boondoggle. Let's do this. Well, we didn't do it haphazardly. We had a bunch of stuff in our back pocket, which was the railroad. If that was a main, like the railroad we have along 131, we wouldn't even have said it. But we have opportunities there because we know the details.
I think we could generally say for a weakness, the need for not only more north-south connections, but improvements to the existing north-south connection. You know, Kenny,
Yeah.
Cooley Road, that should probably be 3 lanes of these.
It's a bottleneck. So
Elmbridge
The
is
big
kind of-
bottleneck that you
Elmbridge
can't
is
do
problematic.
anything about is I-96.
Yep.
You need more crossings of I-96. Not necessarily interchanges, but
I think,
Well, I'm talking even in our internal road network, though, we've got problems with like.
but 50 years ago, Peach Ridge would have been a logical
Yeah,
crossing
that's-
point, and as development occurred, it just didn't
We're working
happen.
at it. We're working at it. You know, we're just one quarter.
We're going to tie this into your CIP too. All this is a spider web thing.
Do we have to?
well, back in
think about-
1961, when they built the freeway, there wasn't much out there.
Right.
It was like being,
There's plenty, right?
well, it was like, yeah, it was like being out there in Lowell Township, Cascade now. Do you need interchanges there? Probably not, but if it develops like this, yeah, you do.
As an outsider, I was amazed the first time I drove into Detroit. I drove into Detroit, and it's bridge, 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 and I'm just going dollar signs, dollar signs. That's how it is in Chicago or New York City. Those bridges are expanded way out. There are no other crossings. So when I first saw that, even before I was rolling the planning, I was like, man, somebody's going to pay for this eventually. And now the bill's coming due. It's 50 years later.
I would say for Omaha's weakness, lack of attractions to this part of the community. I think that at one time we had a vision that included that, and I think now that probably would not be the case.
Explain that.
Well, I think that we would have liked this to develop in a way that it drew people to the city center as like sort of a third corridor of development commercially.
Yeah, that commercial spot, I used to live across the street from the DFW, and I loved it there. I had 2
Yeah.
houses in that area, because it was so nice to have a neighborhood commercial area, and when that left, it lost a lot of its attractiveness.
Well, right now our biggest draw is probably the library for
Yeah.
your average citizen, and I think that would be something I would consider a weakness, especially being that we're kind of isolating 2 sides of Walker with Alpine and Standale, and I feel that that's not.
Is the D&W site the site you have in mind?
It is. I mean, well,
Yeah.
it is and it's not. It is in that that was the legacy of what we were talking about before. I would love to have something across the city center that's a draw. I mean, we've got the one right from.
Well, that would have been senior center or student
Yeah.
place, but, you know, it's.
Well, you're going to see that again, because,
I know.
yeah, the scope of this is 24.
Yeah.
The building as it is now, with that lock and store, and how old it is, and the long time, that's going to come down eventually.
Do we have to worry about, I mean, we can't really do anything about it, but the truck route being in remembrance, is that a weakness?
Mr. Connors.
I mean, it
It's
is.
what do they call it, NCHP road, National Classification Highway 8 NHPP, something like that. It's a special designation that we get extra money to help take care of it.
Okay,
Um,
and that may not be a weakness.
But I don't think that's going to be a big deal. There's no real draw for industry there, except right at Kenny gets a couple of spots.
Right.
My feeling as a member of the planning commission is I don't have much of a take on that, or much of what carries the way. I don't know about everything else.
No,
Well, it's for a trucking, it's not gonna be a cut through.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna go there to save time or take a shortcut. It doesn't really fit.
It just feels like not hurting anything, not really big impact.
Speaking of traffic, how about the northwest corner of this red box?
Yep.
What's that? Remembrance in 3 Mile.
Yeah.
M11 in 3 Mile. Bad geometry, that's not going away,
Right.
right? Fatal crashes, that's not going away. And the crashes happening during the day, non-peak hours. which tells me it's the geometry.
It is a geometry in that.
The morning and evening peak is a convenience.
Yep.
Right there. We'll call that 3 mile.
Yeah, that was on the week.
Remembrance and,
Oh, we did that already.
I talked about general intersection safety there.
All right, so good, we got that.
One of the
is it Remembrance and 3 Mile you're thinking of, Frank?
It's
It's a kind of a trilogy there.
Yeah, it goes, I would just say.
Roxanne, it's also on 11.
Wilson's
Yeah.
there, it's
Yeah,
Remembrance,
you're right,
that
it's
turns into
trilogy.
irony.
Really is.
And complicated
2
by
days.
the county line.
County line,
11.
yeah. So we're getting there with this one, where we just,
We
the city
are.
commission said okay to 3 lanes with a traffic signal at 3 Mile and 11.
And I can't tell you how much positive feedback I was getting when we had that traffic signal there.
Oh, yeah.
People loved it.
I'm surprised
Even
they
temporary.
took it back down.
Yeah, well, we would have liked.
Well, they took it down and no one was looking.
Typically they don't put one up to take it back down. That's bad juju.
Roundabout construction. Okay, how about weaknesses, threats in the future in this part of town? What do you think about what we talked about here generally by 2040?
It's going to be
It should
going to be
fill
full,
in.
built out.
Build out?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
no
that's kind of-
opportunity for growth.
You know, if you look at all the green space,
Build out is a threat.
Build out, no opportunities for development.
if you look at all the green space and think about, like, just Richmond Farms is 400 families that can move in there. And I think about Port Jerry with the school district and how they're gonna deal with, you know, how many kids come out of a residential subdivision with 400 families, that's a lot of kids. So there could be a lot of growth to the school district in the city.
Kids are money.
So Jerry?
Gotta be able to pay to operate it though too, right?
Well,
This
that's
is a good problem to have.
That's,
It's a very good
there
problem
you
to
go.
have.
So is it a threat or is that an opportunity or both?
It's both.
It's both. So school
Cha-ching.
planning and land use planning, relationship between those two. Opportunity and threat. In other words, keep communicating and working together so one doesn't go one way and one doesn't go the other.
Would a threat be the relationship between the business community on 3 Mile and future residential development? No, you're fine. I'll take it when you're done.
Or you can grab a marker too, and write right on it.
Yeah, well, if you want.
Yes, help out. Steve can do a post drive.
So that's heavily industrial too, that area too.
It is.
Do we need to consider more, with more growth, there'll be more opportunities, but I don't,
You also
but
have
that might be a threat too,
there's
I'm
a
not
bunch
sure.
of wetlands in there that
Yeah.
kind of act as a buffer between the industrial and potential residential.
The residential pattern could change to mimic what we have further east, which is a little bit more dense, whether it's apartments or whether it's condos, because that fits a little better against 3 Mile
Right.
Road. Makes a good transition from a neighborhood to maybe apartments or condos and then through to 3 Mile.
Right.
That might fit better.
Just to give a little bit of context, we're
Yes.
again talking about colors here, we're talking about the darker shades of yellow, that stark line of gray, you have industrial cut off from residential. Is it a good idea to have something in between to kind of transition those two land uses? And you see that office and apartment complexes have been scattered in other parts of that corridor.
I got another threat would be potential future economic downturn. So that really
There you go.
throws us for a loop on 3 Mile where we've got a lot of businesses. If a lot of those go under, and then we've got a lot of that type of build out there, that's not ideal.
Which is why we should not benchmark to the old model. You know, that was the thing that jumped right off the page when I'm reading those old master plans. Completely different mindset, you know?
Well, you look at the aging of the population, are we in fact going to get 400 homes full of kids? Or are they going to be not necessarily all residential with young kids? Alpine Estates right now, I mean, it's starting to change a little bit. When we moved in there, we didn't have any kids and we had all these kids running around. Well, then our kids grew up. Now there aren't any kids in the neighborhood. There's a few young ones coming in, but it's an old folks home right now.
Jerry, what's your prediction?
The markers say that there is growth coming, so it's slow growth for a little bit, but there'll be steady growth as the population age out. Others will, the
try and do things that aren't, standard plat or a standard industry. Some of the mixture of uses, some things that may be a little bit different that push the envelope. It's going to be a challenge for this community to accept that. So, if we dial that stuff into the plan, we're going to have some implementation guidance on how you get to that point. Because right now, I think what Dan and I have often said, if it's not a 90-foot wide single-family lot, you're going to have a challenge. The only reason those apartments are going to Standale is because Standale's identified because it is different than the rest of the city.
Right.
It's a junction. GBSU, there's a whole bunch of uniqueness there. All right, summary time, plus any more for the good of the order.
Along the Wilson corridor, as you get closer to intersection with Remembrance, seems like on the west side of the street, there's master planning for commercial through there. Now, what's the status of that?
Check this out. This is where I want to get you out at 7. We're going to give an insurrection. See that?
Now you're back.
That's right. Beginning. You see that? Open space, right? It's master plan for residential, low density residential. What's it zoned? Ooh, it's zoned C2. All that property is currently zoned for commercial development. So, if someone wanted to come in tomorrow with a plan, they could build a C2 zone.
And knowing what they don't want to change it.
Who owns that property?
Vito Dolce.
Vito Dolce, their group. Okay,
They bought it from Lokes, correct?
they did because
So
the
Lokes
movie
at one point was looking at this as a massive intersection, really busy area. That's a vision.
28th Street and the Beltline, all on the west side.
Because it was the west belt line. If you go back to the '68 master plan, M11 was the west belt.
28th Street was the south Beltline.
All right, not to derail too much. The pitchforks are coming.
The 3 mile was the
Speaking of red, where we don't intuit this as commercial, what we have right by City Hall here, it's another lot zone of commercial.
Thankfully, that's a small.
It is. It's very hard to build on. But just to go to the point that zoning doesn't always line up with our master plan goals.
If you wanted to be really progressive with your zoning, whatever we come up with a master plan, we'll have implementation items and we'll work this out. Do you want to go in and change zoning on properties? There's no vested interest in people's zoning legally. Practically, there sure is. Say to the Dulces, and we tried this last time.
I'm going to say and politically.
Oh yeah, remember when we tried, we did this with the gateways, and the Dulces were like, there's no way you're taking that commercial zone away. Now, if they sue you, they don't have any standing. But do you really want to do that? I look at it as the market's not going to support any commercial development. That's why you've got to be careful with Lewis Farms, because the more you keep pushing on M11, people will speculate on commercial development. That's how hard they get a loan now. But, people are also looking to invest money. Okay, I've taken you up to 7. I will compile all this. Dan will compile his stuff, and then you'll start to see it plugged into the master plan, subplan process. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Frank.
Yes.
3 minutes over, I think. At least not snack. Actually, I ate my handful of carrots before I
I've also very fortunate to have you.
Where do you live? Where do you work? Because, let's see here, what was you doing together? One, you worked in Grand Haven? Okay,
Thanks, Ricky.
I went to Grand Valley, and the last time I was at a meeting where road commission was, when you guys were redoing 46. Just south of, why do I know you then?
I don't know.
I worked in the city of Grand Rapids.
Did you?
That was my new partner.
So we got photos of that? Yep.